No one saw it coming. At 2:14 a.m., three explosions turned silence into fire across Iran's nuclear zone. The president didn't consult Congress. He didn't brief intelligence. He didn't ask permission. He just pressed send and called it decisive leadership. The headlines followed. So did the panic. But in the middle of the noise, one voice didn't yell. It quoted. AOC walked into the committee room, held up one sheet of paper, just one, and read 13 words from a law older than most people watching. The room went silent, because it wasn't an opinion, it was statute. And in 5 seconds, a war narrative collapsed into a legal reckoning. This story is a dramatization, but the fear was real. The law she read exists, and the question she asked still echoes. If Congress doesn't declare war, who does? If you've ever wondered whether one voice can stand against missiles, keep watching, because this time, the loudest weapon was a whisper backed by law. 12:03 a.m., Tehran time. 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, Natanz, Iraq, and Fordow, lit up the night sky with synchronized eruptions. Not a training exercise, not a warning shot. These were precision airstrikes, and America hadn't even blinked. Across the globe, satellite feeds captured smoke trails spiraling into the desert dark. Intel analysts refreshed screens in disbelief. World leaders scrambled calls. But the Capitol dome, still dark, still silent. No declaration, no emergency vote, no appearance by Congress. Just one ripple of fire that triggered a tidal wave of political questions. By 12:18 a.m. Eastern Time, Al Jazeera broke the first report. Within minutes, the BBC, Reuters, and NHK followed. CNN's banner screamed, "Breaking! Strikes on Iranian sites. White House hasn't consulted Congress." Then came the flood. Crude oil spiked nearly 20% in under an hour. NATO's eastern flank raised alert levels. New Delhi imposed internet blackouts. Gold prices surged. U.S. embassies worldwide entered lockdown. And online, the fury ignited. On Twitter, hashtags spread like a second strike wave. Hashtag is this war? Hashtag Congress, what's sleeping? Hashtag permission to war. At 1:03 a.m., a viral post appeared. No photo, no name. They launched missiles at a nuclear country without even asking Congress. We voted for laws, not kings. It was retweeted 3.1 million times in 2 hours. By dawn, the U.S. government had said nothing. Not the House Speaker, not the Senate Majority Leader, not even a vague White House briefing. And then it leaked. A 14-second clip, a camera phone. Trump's voice, unmistakable, in an off-the-record exchange with a small group of aides. Congress is too slow. Do we really need their permission anymore? No spin, no edit, just raw arrogance. That clip exploded across the digital world. TikTok parodies, IG reels, threads of legal scholars citing the Constitution, civics teachers posting breakdowns of the War Powers Act. AOC reposted the clip at 3:41 a.m. Caption, "If process is slow, why not speed it up? Legally." She added a second post, just one image, a printed page of the War Powers Resolution, Section 5B underlined in red. The caption below read, "Shall," not should. Shall, that single word, shall, became a rallying cry. Meanwhile, the American public jolted awake. Parents turned off cartoons and switched to breaking news. Students texted classmates, "Are we at war?" Veterans called their representatives. And yet the House chamber remained locked. Senate inboxes stayed full. The people had questions, but the lawmakers had no script. By 7 a.m., CBS ran a segment titled "A Nation Unbriefed." NBC's Andrea Mitchell said on air, "The missiles launched before the microphones did." America was asking, who gave the order? Where was the debate? Did democracy just get benched by speed? And beneath all of it, one thought kept spreading, quiet, chilling, unresolved. If Congress didn't authorize this, who actually did? That morning, high school government teachers everywhere rewrote their lesson plans. Because on that night, America didn't just attack Iran's nuclear capabilities. It exposed its own democratic silence. And one woman in the Bronx wasn't sleeping. She wasn't tweeting outrage. She was pulling out legal codes, and she wasn't going to wait for the dome to light up before she did. The missiles had already landed, but in a quiet corner of the Bronx, there was no war room, just a kitchen table and a lukewarm cup of coffee. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat in sweats, hair tied back, surrounded by budget printouts and a blinking cursor on a half-finished community healthcare memo. The kind of night that rarely makes headlines until the world flips upside down. Her phone buzzed. Internal email. Subject line. No need for congressional briefing. She read it twice. Then again. No need. 3 nuclear facilities had just been bombed in a sovereign nation, and Congress wasn't even summoned. She didn't scream. She didn't call a press conference. She stood up, walked to her wall planner, and scanned the week. Next to a yellow sticky note about a housing subcommittee hearing, another square was already marked in black Sharpie. A handwritten reminder, they'll skip process. Don't skip response. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. She'd written that weeks ago after noticing a sudden uptick in closed-door briefings and vague foreign policy language. And now, with the Capitol silent and the world on fire, that note stared back like prophecy. She flipped open her binder, tabbed, highlighted, annotated like a lawyer heading into trial. Section 1544 of the War Powers Resolution, highlighted months ago. She had a feeling this page would matter. The media might have been asleep when the missiles flew, but the law wasn't. Neither was she. She opened her laptop, one tab for the congressional record, one for Department of Defense logs, another for Twitter, not to react, but to listen. What she saw confirmed everything. Is this legal? Did Congress authorize this? Who decided this was okay? Questions, anger, fear, but no leadership. That void, it wasn't just dangerous, it was familiar. It always shows up when power moves faster than accountability. She took a deep breath and sent one message to her chief of staff. I'm not asking if they want me to speak. I'm asking when the mic turns on. The reply came instantly. Tomorrow is wide open. Cameras are waiting. She smiled, not out of excitement, but responsibility. She'd never asked for this kind of war, but she knew the rules it should follow. If no one else would read them aloud, she would. Then she posted 3 words, read before react. Below it, a screenshot of Section 5B of the War Powers Act. No editorial, just law. Let it speak. And it did. Within minutes, legal analysts reposted it. Civics teachers turned it into slides. Even teenagers on TikTok were annotating it line by line. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is just point to what's been ignored. And sometimes the most radical move is to simply remember what the rules are. While others raced to justify or deflect, she stayed in the facts. While the White House drafted talking points, she pulled up legal precedents. While some looked for spin, she looked for statutes. The world had woken up to fire, but AOC hadn't gone to sleep. Not when the Constitution was being bypassed at missile speed. Not when silence was being sold as strength. And not when every American had the right to know, who gets to decide when we go to war? That night, as headlines circled and hashtags burned, her apartment lights stayed on, not in protest, but in vigilance. The living room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of her laptop and the bluish flicker of a muted TV replaying missile footage over and over. AOC didn't look away, but she wasn't watching the explosion. She was watching the silence that followed it. She opened the drawer beneath her desk and pulled out a worn, dog-eared copy of the War Powers Resolution. It wasn't for decoration. It was for nights like this. Flipping past the introduction, past the preamble, she stopped at Section 5B, a section underlined so many times the ink had bled through. Within 60 calendar days after a report is submitted, the President shall terminate any use of United States Armed Forces unless the Congress has declared war or has enacted a specific authorization for such use of United States Armed Forces. She reached for a red pen and underlined it again anyway. Because if missiles could leave craters in Tehran, a red line could still hold ground in Washington. She messaged her chief of staff. He forgot who holds the war powers. Let's remind him. There was no emoji, No exclamation mark. Just quiet, precise fury. In another tab, her staff had already uploaded the document to their internal drive. They were ahead of her, but only by a minute. That's how they worked when it mattered. She stood, grabbed a yellow sticky note, and wrote, "If they duck the law, we cite it louder." It wasn't rebellion, it was restoration. 10 minutes later, she was pacing, slow, deliberate steps, phone to ear. "Yeah, I need 3 sources on legislative war powers. Modern examples. Libya, Syria. Hell, even Grenada if you want. Just get me solid precedents." A pause, then a chuckle. "Yes, I know it's 1 a.m. That's why we're faster than them." Because while some staffers were drafting press releases, hers were digging through footnotes. And while pundits screamed about retaliation, she was rereading the conditions that made retaliation legal or not. This wasn't about her name on a headline. This was about the names that died when wars started wrong. And in that moment, she thought of something chilling. What if America's war power had become like a fire alarm with the batteries ripped out? Loud only in theory. Silent in crisis. She couldn't let that be. Opening her notes app, she began outlining a 3-minute video. No graphics, no music, just her voice and a simple printed copy of the War Powers Act. Maybe even hold it up, line by line. She didn't want flair. She wanted focus. Before the video, she posted one sentence. "The Constitution has no muzzle. Don't give it one." In an age where everyone shouted, she planned to whisper. But in that whisper would be law, history, obligation. She stared at the printout again. So simple, so ignored. And then the thought hit her. When missiles talk first, the Constitution shouldn't whisper last. That would be her closer. The words that punch harder than any headline. The line no one could spin without confessing they were afraid of it. By 3 a.m., the clip was ready to go live at dawn. She closed her laptop, took a breath, and scribbled one more note onto her whiteboard. "Let's make silence expensive." The room was quiet, but this time it wasn't passive. It was the kind of quiet before a storm, not of missiles, but of truth. Capitol Hill was silent. No sirens, no emergency session, not a single call for hearings from the Speaker's office. Both parties, Democrat and Republican, were still, as if the erasure of 3 nuclear facilities was a footnote in a foreign news cycle. But AOC wasn't asleep. At 2 a.m., she drove herself to the Capitol. No press, no cameras. She didn't need a spotlight. She needed a light, any light, from an institution meant to represent the people in moments exactly like this. She unlocked the building. The click of the latch echoed like a question. Where is everybody? The hallways were cold. Each step she took felt like a challenge to the silence. Committee room doors were shut, no motion. The only glow came from a lonely vending machine at the end of the corridor. She stopped at room 229, the House Foreign Affairs Committee. No lights, no staffers, no emergency notice, not even a taped agenda. She looked at the empty corkboard and exhaled through her nose. It wasn't tiredness. It was something else. Disbelief wrapped in resolve. She pulled out her phone. The screen lit up with a tweet she had saved. 3 Iranian nuclear sites struck. No congressional hearings scheduled. Hashtag is this war. Hashtag Congress was sleeping. She didn't need to speak. Instead, she grabbed a dry erase marker from her bag and scribbled 5 words across the whiteboard hanging beside the door. If this isn't war, what is? She capped the pen. That would be her alarm bell. She kept walking. Her own office was 1 floor up, small, lit, and waiting. On her desk, a coffee from the night before sat cold. On her wall, next to a cluttered schedule, 1 line stood out in black ink. They'll skip process. Don't skip response. That line wasn't new. It had been posted weeks ago, during another rushed vote, another corner cut in the name of urgency. She opened her laptop and reviewed the speech draft she'd been working on. This isn't about partisanship, it's about principle. If missiles launch before debate, then the Constitution should not be the last voice we hear. She picked up her phone. No alerts, no briefings, no leadership calls. So she wrote her own. To her team, mock hearing, 9 a.m. tomorrow. If they won't call it, We will. If Congress was asleep, someone had to be the alarm. Not through shouting, through showing up. She stood at the window. Outside, D.C. glowed under late-night traffic. Unbothered, unaware. She closed her eyes, not in despair, but in certainty, because she knew silence in power is not the end. Not if someone chooses to stay awake. 2.2. The student who still remembers. They were just teenagers. The classroom smelled faintly of dry erase markers and anxiety. A late autumn morning, one girl, hair tied back, hoodie sleeves rolled up, raised her hand. She wasn't one to speak unless it counted. "Who declares war?" she asked. The class went silent, surprised not by the question, but by the seriousness in her voice. The teacher, a man in his 60s with a soft Southern accent and eyes that had seen 2 deployments, paused. Then he answered, not from a textbook, but from memory. "Congress, unless they're too quiet." That line never left her. While other students returned to doodles and half-finished worksheets, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a notebook. Not school-issued, but personal. On the corner of a clean page, she wrote, "Let's not make silence law." Years later, that same notebook sat open on her congressional desk. And those words, they weren't just ink, they were prophecy. The irony was brutal. The people who once encouraged her civic engagement were now calling her reckless. The same pundits who applauded courageous debate now accused her of being too emotional. And the same colleagues who once passed her congratulatory notes now avoided eye contact when she cited Article 1, Section 8. But she remembered that day. She remembered how quiet the classroom got. And she remembered how the silence didn't feel safe. It felt complicit. So when the hearing room dimmed and the cameras blinked red, she didn't flinch. She brought the notebook. "You're grandstanding," one critic scoffed. She turned, smiled, and placed a single sentence in the record. War should never be authorized by silence. The room tensed. A few leaned forward. One aide dropped their pen. Then she added, "I learned that in high school civics. Maybe some of you should audit." It wasn't rage, it was recall. What they didn't understand was this. AOC wasn't improvising. She was remembering, recalling every lesson ignored, every question shrugged off, every student taught that democracy was a performance, not a practice. But this moment wasn't for theater. It was for the girl who once asked who declares war and got the only honest answer a teacher could give. And it was for everyone since who's been told to wait their turn. That clip, just 42 seconds, would be replayed on 1,000 channels. On TikTok, someone stitched it with a clip of that old civics textbook, highlighting the clause she quoted. On Twitter, a veteran wrote, "I deployed for Congress, not compliance." On Reddit, a student posted, "Our teacher showed us this today. We're debating it tomorrow." And in a quiet apartment, somewhere far from the hill, a retired teacher turned off his TV, reached for a pen, and wrote one final note. She remembered. So I didn't have to forget. Closing caption. She wasn't loud. She was accurate. And in a town addicted to volume, accuracy is rebellion. She didn't pre-announce. No scheduled press release. No staff-crafted captions. At 9:47 p.m., Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez opened a live stream from her office. The camera shook slightly at first, then steadied. No makeup, no flag backdrop. Just a desk, a binder, and a copy of the War Powers Resolution in her hands, worn, creased, underlined in ink. She didn't lecture. She read, word for word. Section 5B. Within 60 calendar days after a report is submitted or is required to be submitted pursuant to Section 401, the President shall terminate any use of United States Armed Forces unless the Congress has, she paused, has declared war or has enacted a specific authorization. She looked straight at the lens. No sound effects, no outrage, just the legal text and the reality that someone had decided it didn't matter. The comments were quiet at first, then surged. Wait, why didn't we know this? She's literally just reading the law. How is this not on every channel? She continued, not to preach, but to remind. Clause after clause, section after section, She read what America had filed away in a drawer. Until the moment those words mattered more than ever. 23 minutes in, she paused again, flipped a page, tapped it with her pen. If the War Powers Act had dust on it, tonight we wipe it off. She leaned forward and delivered one sentence, flat, clear, final. It's not radical. It's just dusty. The live stream ended. 9 hours later, it had over 7 million views. Not a single viral catchphrase. No shouting match. No drama bait headline. Just a woman in Congress reading the law as if it still meant something. And suddenly, across comment sections, classrooms, and cable debates, the Constitution wasn't forgotten anymore. It was trending. It wasn't part of a press conference. It wasn't on the record. But it leaked. At 6:13 a.m., an anonymous 19-second video spread across encrypted chats, and then, inevitably, Twitter. A shadowed room, a blur of suits, the voice unmistakable. Do we really need their permission? The we was the executive branch. The there was Congress. The tone, flippant, casual, dismissive. By 6:45 a.m., the hashtag permission war had ignited across every platform. A surge of disbelief flooded timelines. Not just outrage, uncertainty. Did he just erase the Constitution on camera? Is this how wars start now? With a rhetorical question? Some said it was taken out of context. Some argued it was sarcasm. But the words didn't echo in jest. They thudded like a gavel dropped in the wrong hands. By 7 a.m., major networks played the clip on loop. By 8:15, think tanks had weighed in. By 9:03, a live poll asked, should presidents need congressional approval to strike a sovereign nation? It was the question America thought had already been answered in 1973. The War Powers Resolution wasn't a footnote, it was law. But the clip revealed something deeper than a constitutional violation. It revealed contempt, not just for process, but for accountability. Inside the Capitol, silence. The dome stood as it always did, ornate, grand, and suddenly symbolic of something hollow. Staffers passed each other in corridors with raised eyebrows, not greetings. Coffee cups were gripped tighter. Phones buzzed longer. No one had a plan, but everyone had a reaction. And at the center of it, unofficial, unsanctioned, undeniable, was a voice unbothered by the burden of law. It wasn't the volume of the clip that shook Washington. It was the certainty in the tone, the ease with which one man implied that war could be declared not by procedure, but by whim. That's when the question shifted. Who recorded it? Why now? Was it real? But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't ask those questions. She heard the voice. Then she pulled up the War Powers Act again. She scrolled past the clauses everyone skimmed. She stopped at the line no one quoted. Congress shall have the power to declare war. No emojis, no commentary, no caption drama. Just a single repost of the video and one line beneath it. He asked if we're needed. The Constitution already answered. That reply didn't trend instantly. It didn't come with fireworks, but it's seeded in classrooms, in editorial rooms, in living rooms. Because the moment wasn't just about a leak. It was about what had been left out of the room and who was walking back in. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm the Capitol steps or call a press conference under the rotunda. She just walked into a committee room with a single folder and sat down like it was any other Thursday. There were no reporters, just a handful of aides, half-tuned interns, and a live stream button blinking red. The internet was still reeling from the leaked clip. The one where the president muttered, "Do we really need their permission?" A sentence that had detonated trust in the war power structure with more force than any missile. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't open with outrage. She opened with paper, a quiet flip of the folder, a glance at her phone. He spoke yesterday, she said into the mic, tone steady. Now let's read what he didn't. She held up a thin printout. No flashy graphics, no charts, just text. And then she read. It took 15 seconds. Section 5B of the War Powers Resolution requires the President to consult with Congress before introducing U.S. armed forces into hostilities. She paused. Not for drama, for meaning, and then she closed the folder. It's not complicated. It's just been ignored long enough to seem radical. That was it. No personal attacks, no lectures, just law. The clip of her reading that clause, 15 seconds, no soundtrack, no edits, went viral within the hour. Commenters wrote, "She didn't punch. She pointed, no yelling, just reading, and still louder than the president." Cable news scrambled to catch up. Kyron's flipped from debate escalates over executive power to AOC reintroduces the Constitution to the conversation. It wasn't the volume that caught America's attention. It was the volume she didn't need. In a world addicted to noise, she weaponized clarity, and the impact landed like a verdict. Because while others were still shouting over clips, AOC had already turned the page and held it up for the nation to see. And the subtext couldn't be missed. If silence is consent, then reading is resistance. They didn't wait 24 hours. Fox News ran a full segment titled AOC's Delusion, Dangerously Naive or Just Plain Dangerous. The Chiron didn't blink. The panel didn't pause. They spoke over each other, building a choir of disdain. Words like childish, out of her depth, and national threat flew like confetti across the screen. One commentator laughed. "She thinks waving a piece of paper stops bombs." But AOC didn't flinch. She didn't counter with name-calling. She opened her notes. And on the next live stream, facing the noise head-on, she placed a copy of the Constitution on the table. Not a digital prop, but a dog-eared, sticky-noted, underlined copy she'd carried since her first campaign. "I'm not here to make you like me," she began, "but if you're going to call me dangerous, you better explain this clause first." She flipped directly to Article 1, Section 8. "Read it. Slowly. Calmly. Congress shall have the power to declare war." Then she asked a question. What's more dangerous, sounding naive or pretending this doesn't exist? The internet lit up again, this time not just in support, but in search. Google Trends reported a 500% spike in searches for War Powers Resolution and Article 1, Section 8 within 2 hours. AOC didn't rant. She educated. She wasn't throwing fire. She was lighting torches, and for every insult hurled at her on cable TV, she responded with a footnote. For every personal jab, she offered precedent. For every headline calling her radical, she cited history. One clip went especially viral, her looking directly into the camera, holding up the document like a mirror. The Constitution doesn't care who you voted for. It only cares who respects it. It didn't go unnoticed. Veterans reposted it. Law professors commented. Even a former Bush official tweeted, "You can disagree with her politics, but not with her citations." The narrative began to shift, not just around AOC, but around the very idea of political literacy. She didn't shout over her critics. She surrounded them with facts, because sometimes the loudest defense is a quiet reference. And in the chaos of punditry and partisanship, one voice kept cutting through. Not because it was louder, but because it was sourced. The hearing room looked more like a museum than a meeting of Congress. Cold, still, air stiff with discomfort. AOC entered quietly, her heels soft against the marble. She didn't look for a welcome. She knew there wouldn't be one. 3 chairs on her right were empty, 2 more across the aisle, and the ones that were filled, eyes buried in folders, screens, anything but hers. This wasn't absence by scheduling. It was absence by strategy, and she could feel it. One aide in the corner pretended to adjust his earpiece, though the mic had been off for hours. Another member whispered to a colleague, not realizing the mic wasn't off this time. "She's just going to quote something again." Watch, she did hear, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she placed her folder on the table, slow and deliberate. The room heard the thud. Inside it wasn't a statement, it was a timeline of every presidential military engagement over the past 20 years. Which ones had congressional approval, which didn't. She didn't call names. She marked patterns. And then she looked up, letting her silence linger. A stone-faced senator finally asked, "What's your point?" AOC turned the folder toward him. "My point is in these gaps. My point is the growing distance between the Constitution and what we allow. No shouting, no showboating, just documentation, just consequences." Cameras zoomed in on her face, on the folder, on the empty chairs. The hashtags returned. Hashtag where were they? Hashtag empty chairs. Matter hashtag she showed up in the back, a staffer recorded. That clip, AOC surrounded by the void of accountability, would loop across networks that night. No edits, no commentary. Just a room full of retreat and one woman standing firm. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In a chamber designed for debate, it was the silence that roared. And when she finally spoke again, she didn't address her colleagues. She addressed the chair left vacant by the Secretary of Defense, who had opted not to appear. "You didn't show up today," she said, "but the authorization you skipped did." No one responded, and that was the response. Because sometimes it's not the noise that defines a hearing, it's the echo. She didn't notice him at first. The hearing had just ended. The room was thinning, colleagues ducking out without eye contact, reporters already outside chasing spin. AOC gathered her folder with the quiet energy of someone still processing silence louder than words. That's when she felt it, a presence lingering just beyond the velvet rope. Not press, not a staffer, a man, gray at the temples, clean shave, squared stance. His clothes were plain, but the pins on his lapel weren't. Bronze Star, Iraq, Afghanistan. He didn't ask for a photo. He just stepped forward, paused like a man trained to speak only when it mattered, and handed her a folded piece of paper. Then he stepped back. She looked down. The handwriting was blocky, steady, unmistakably military. "We serve so Congress could speak, not stay silent." That was it. No name, no date, just that. And somehow it said everything the others in the room wouldn't. She stood there longer than she meant to, paper still in hand, as aides whispered about the next meeting, and security kept a subtle eye on the man who had already begun to walk away. She caught up before he hit the stairs. "What's your name?" He stopped, turned. "Does it matter?" She tilted her head. "To me it does. Call it from one vet to a representative who still reads the damn manual." And then he was gone. Later that note would sit framed on the edge of her desk, not for show, but as armor. The kind that doesn't clang, the kind that reminds. That night she didn't tweet it. She didn't need to. Someone else had caught it on video. His handoff, her pause, the paper, the moment. By morning, the clip hit 4.3 million views. Hashtags trended anew. Hashtag veterans for voice. Hashtag note, not noise. Hashtag she listens. AOC issued no official comment, but when asked by a local station what the message meant to her, she replied, "It means they didn't risk their lives for empty chairs. It means silence is not strategy, it's surrender." She didn't call for outrage. She called for remembrance of what hearings were for, what the Constitution protects, who it's supposed to serve. And as Twitter exploded, the paper said nothing more. It didn't need to, because in a capital that had traded volume for vapor, a single line from a soldier had done what the loudest voices hadn't. It brought the room back to purpose. The room held its breath. Not a single chuckle, cough, or rustle broke the hush. AOC stepped forward, not with flair, but with purpose. She looked around, meeting eyes rather than scanning notes. She didn't deliver a speech. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened her folder, cleared her throat once, and read, "Only Congress shall declare war." That was it, 7 words. But in that passage from Article 1, Section 8, there was gravity, history, and conviction. The simplicity of the statement was its power, cutting through layers of noise like a laser. The silence deepened. A taut pause, so long and so full, it felt like time itself had held its breath. Then, a single clap, a spark in the stillness. Soon another, then another. Fast and ephemeral, the applause spread, starting in the corner, coursing like electricity across the room. It was no staged ovation. It was a spontaneous acknowledgement of truth delivered with integrity. Not theatrics, but resonance. Why it hit so hard, no commentary. She didn't explain, exaggerate, or embellish. She let the words stand alone, trusting them to carry the weight. Nothing emotional, no tear, no tremble, just clarity. Historic muscle, a vocal reminder of America's founding design. That war is not the sole domain of any one person, but the collective voice of the people's representatives. At first, a few lawmakers looked surprised, caught between political allegiances and constitutional duty. Staffers glanced at each other, uncertain. The press leaned in, fingers hovering over record buttons. Cameras whipped flashes. A freshman representative from the opposite party rose, not to criticize, but to support. He spoke up. In 7 words, she reminded us what this chamber is for. That's when the wave of applause grew. Not a partisan chorus, but an institutional one. Members from across the aisle stood, unfolding their desks, offering silent acknowledgement of principle. Cameras captured it, AOC's calm confidence, their rising respect, the shift from division to unity. Within minutes, the clip was circulating. Twitter videos captioned, "No theatrics, just truth." Article 1 over agenda. On TikTok, civics teachers used the clip to anchor lessons, students bookmarked it, and political commentators replayed it in slow motion, frame by frame, each word echoing like a gong. One high school debate team used it as their opening quote, "Only Congress shall declare war." One Pulitzer Prize journalist wrote, "That line didn't feed a narrative. It fed a country's conscience." Authenticity. AOC's delivery felt raw, not robotic, not rehearsed, just real. Clarity. 7 simple words, no frills, no spin. Connection. She didn't speak to win. She spoke to wake up. A divided room, a disconnected public, a distracted system. And for a moment, Washington stopped performing. It remembered what it was built to do. That afternoon, a lobbyist sent out a memo to clients. Expect hearings to revisit constitutional war authority. By evening, an email circulated in thousands of schools. Use this clip in your next civics unit. Local papers printed op-eds. Why she didn't shout matters more than what she said. One law professor wrote, "We've taught separation of powers for decades, but few moments crystallize it like this." She didn't follow up with interviews. No grandstanding, no retaliatory tweets. She vanished from the headlines until morning, but on her office wall, she did something else. Next to the taped hearing transcript, she added the quote, "Only Congress shall declare war." A reminder, a challenge, a statement of principle. Inside her office, visitors began leaving notes. One aide later said, people would stop, read it, leave quietly, no fanfare, just thought. That became part of the story too. Power reclaimed not by volume, but by quiet insistence. That evening, a civics teacher in Ohio published a clip. On screen, a student asked, "Why doesn't she just say more?" Teacher answered, "Sometimes truth speaks loudest when it whispers." Students shared screenshots. We need more whispers like this. In a world addicted to spectacle, this was a masterclass in modesty. No grand speech, no calculated attack. Just a line from the Constitution, firmly declared. Because sometimes the strongest impact isn't made with noise. It's made when someone simply remembers the rules. And in just 7 words, she reminded us all. It started as a whimper. Then it bit. A document dump hit just after 2:12 a.m. No press conference, no pre-spun narrative, just PDFs on a server. And within them, one memo that punched through the fog. Stamped internal only, dated 2 weeks prior. Subject line, operational coordination, legislative circumvention. Inside, a single line underlined twice in red. Minimize congressional friction. The room didn't just tilt, it shook. Within minutes, screenshots surfaced on Reddit, TikTok, and Discord forums. By sunrise, hashtag friction was planned and hashtag DOJ knew lit up Twitter like a fuse. At first, the networks dismissed it, calling it unconfirmed and lacking context. But context followed fast. The memo was real. The Department of Justice had been directed to stand down, not weigh in. No constitutional briefing, no war powers consultation. The intent wasn't unclear. It was typed. Minimize congressional friction wasn't just careless language. It was choreography. And Congress? Congress wasn't just ignored. It was designed out of the operation. At 7:03 a.m., a clip went viral of AOC at a coffee stand, phone in hand, reading the memo aloud with a face like stone. So this was the plan, not a glitch, a strategy. Then, without raising her voice, When you design around the Constitution, it's not efficiency, it's sabotage. Cable panels panicked. Former prosecutors were rushed onto sets. Some tried to soften it. These are routine pre-ops. But the phrase had already cut through the noise. Minimize congressional friction. That wasn't policy. That was war with a silencer. By noon, an emergency presser was scheduled at the DOJ. But AOC wasn't waiting for their spin. She live-streamed from her office. No graphics, no filter, just a plain printed copy of the memo in her hands. Let's talk about what friction really means, she began. It means resistance, debate, oversight. It means Congress doing its job. The kind of job that stops bad calls from becoming body counts. Her voice stayed even. Her words did not. Friction isn't the problem. It's the point. In less than an hour, her stream had 1.3 million views. A pin of her quote topped Reddit's r/politics for 19 straight hours. Commenters called it the constitutional mic drop of the decade. And yet the memo was only part of it. The leak included email chains, staffers from multiple agencies coordinating in euphemisms. One message read, "Fast-track the order. Assume limited Hill awareness." Another, "We've looped in comms. No need to brief appropriations, just state." Each one a breadcrumb of evasion, each one a spark. And the American public? They weren't just angry, they were insulted. They had watched Congress be bypassed like a traffic cone, and AOC had handed them the receipt. That night, she ended her second live stream with a line that would be quoted, memed, printed on shirts. They feared the friction because they feared the facts. But you can't duct tape democracy. Not now, not on her watch. There was no podium flourish, no flags flapping, just a sheet of foam board on an easel with two words printed in bold red: not briefed, not lawful. That was it. The room was full, but AOC didn't wait for silence. She walked in, pointed to the poster, and said the one thing no other member of Congress had dared. This isn't about foreign policy, it's about domestic betrayal. Flashes went off, microphones adjusted. The room leaned forward. She didn't rant. She didn't lecture. She simply asked, "What else are they skipping?" Silence. Not from the press, but from the institutions they were all pretending still worked. The night before, her team had printed that poster using a local shop still open at midnight. They debated font size, not slogans. She chose Helvetica. Sharp, clean, unapologetic. She didn't want arguments. She wanted a reckoning. By morning, the poster was everywhere. Screenshotted, tweeted, even reprinted on makeshift protest signs. Some tried to mock it. Right-wing commentators called it childish theater. But it hit a nerve. The public didn't see theater. They saw clarity. In a sea of spin, someone had finally said it plain. Not briefed. Not lawful. No legal tap dance. No national security smokescreen. Just a red alarm printed big enough to be seen from the back row of American indifference. Then she took one question. Just one. A reporter asked, "Do you think this violates the War Powers Resolution?" AOC didn't blink. It violates something deeper than that. It violates consent. Government at its core isn't about explosions. It's about permission. If you skip the people's voice, what exactly are you defending? The clip cut through feeds like a scalpel. Within an hour, the hashtag what are they skipping trended across platforms. It wasn't just about Iran anymore. It was about process and principle. Students printed the phrase on lockers. Veterans reposted it with campaign medals in the background. Even a few moderate Republicans shared it, quietly, like a whisper of conscience. And behind it all, one poster. Not a speech, not a filibuster. Just truth in typeface. The press wanted a brawl. AOC gave them a mirror. Later that afternoon, a conservative pundit shouted over a cable debate, "Where's her alternative plan?" But the audience wasn't listening for plans anymore. They were listening for honesty. And AOC had delivered it, without shouting, without spinning, without permission. That night, as the sun set behind the Capitol, someone projected her poster onto the Library of Congress. Two words in red, across marble, across history. And when the cameras returned to her office, AOC was already gone. No celebration, no tweet storm, no victory lap, just one more handwritten note on her legal pad. They skipped process. We won't skip truth. The poster had no sound, no animation, just bold red letters. But it echoed louder than any speech on the floor. 2 days after the live stream, letters began arriving. Not emails, not tweets. Real letters. Folded paper, handwritten addresses, envelopes sealed with urgency. One stood out, a single sentence in cursive. She didn't need a gavel, she needed a printer. No return name, no hashtag, just truth wrapped in ink and envelope. It wasn't viral, it was visceral. Teachers started getting unexpected questions. What's the War Powers Act? Is Congress allowed to stop the president? Why wasn't there a vote? They weren't reading from a civics textbook. They were reacting to a woman with no committee chair, no special title, just a poster and a microphone. Some schools rewrote lesson plans. One principal posted a memo. We're not teaching outrage. We're teaching oversight. In Denver, a class created a mural, the words "not briefed, not lawful," hand-painted across a gym wall. In Detroit, a veteran donated his uniform to a local library's war display, alongside a printed copy of AOC's War Powers quote. In Arkansas, a Sunday sermon turned political. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but render unto the Constitution what is ours. No call to violence, no party slogans, just a ripple. Something old was waking up. Civic muscle, rarely exercised but never gone. Meanwhile, networks scrambled to control the narrative. One anchor sneered, "She's not a general. Why should we listen?" But the reply came not from AOC, but from a fifth grader in Cleveland who wrote into her school newspaper. Because she used the law, not the launch codes. The shift was quiet but powerful. Americans weren't just reacting, they were researching. Google Trends spiked. War Powers Resolution 1973. Presidential authority on Iran. Separation of powers explained. It wasn't a firestorm, it was a floodlight. And under that light, even allies flinched. One senator was caught on hot mic saying, "She's making us all look asleep." By Friday, AOC's team had to open a second P.O. box for the overflow of mail. One envelope had no letter, just a crumpled ballot from an 1880s election and a post-it. Took me 40 years to believe it mattered again. Cable news called it a media stunt, but no one staged this. It was what happens when someone reminds a country it was built to question, not just cheer. Even some GOP staffers began whispering, not defection, but discomfort. Not agreement, but acknowledgement. A moment came when a group of high schoolers visited the Capitol. They weren't there for photos. They walked straight to her office, waited in line, left a copy of the Constitution on her receptionist's desk, marked at Article 1, Section 8. No note, no fanfare, just underlined, "to declare war." AOC didn't tweet that visit, but she kept the marked copy in her binder the next day. When asked what she planned to do next, she said only, "It's not about next, it's about now." That night, a late-night host made a joke. Apparently, you don't need to yell to wake up America. You just need a laser printer and guts. Laughter, but also applause. The moment had shifted, from controversy to clarity, from partisanship to principle. Not because she changed the law, but because she reminded people it existed. The Constitution didn't move. The people did. And AOC had been the spark. When a journalist asked her if she felt vindicated, she paused, then said, "I don't need to be right. I need the process to matter." That quote made front pages, not as opinion, but as accountability. Because this wasn't just about Iran. It was about America asking itself, who decides? And for the first time in a long time, the question didn't fade. It grew. On a Tuesday morning, at exactly 10 a.m., every major news network cut to the same live feed. AOC stepping to the microphone in a packed hearing room, cameras flashing like distant storm warnings. She had 5 minutes, 4 minutes and 17 seconds of floor time. No notes, no teleprompter, nothing to disrupt the momentum. She began with a direct address, a calm that carried thunder. "Good morning. I have 5 minutes. I'll take 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I won't read. I'll speak truth. And there it was. No grandstanding, no political theater, just clarity. First minute, 00 to 100. Stakes. She reminded the nation what happened. 3 Iranian nuclear sites struck. No vote, no cameras, no oversight. Her voice was even, but you could hear the weight. This isn't about left or right. It's about who speaks first and who stays silent. Her gaze swept across the room. Empty chairs, press corps scribbling notes, the American public waiting at home. Second minute, 1 to 2. The law. No jargon, only essentials. Article 1, Section 8, War Powers Resolution, Section 5B. She quoted it succinctly. No embellishment, no edge. Congress shall declare war. Shall, not may. Her voice grew firmer. This isn't policy preference. It's constitutional requirement. The clip online later displayed this moment. AOC's hand steady, her tone measured, the words echoing on the feed. Commenters called it a calm hammer. Quietest mic drop. Third minute, 2 to 3. The consequences. She shifted tone only slightly. When we skip debate, we increase risk. We invite miscalculation. We silence dissent. She spoke of young soldiers overseas, deployments made without full scrutiny, babies born without a parent, families reshaped, futures altered. No accusations, just accountability. Every second, the pace tightened. Fourth minute, 3 to 4. The people. She dropped the document and leaned forward. But this isn't just about checks and balances. It's about every American asking, did you ask us first? She named constituents, teachers, students, veterans, who'd written, called, marched. She held up a few envelopes, quick flashes on TV screens. She didn't need a gavel. She needed a printer. That line landed harder than any rhetorical flourish. Final 17 seconds, 400 to 417. The challenge. AOC looked directly into the camera. If democracy is a promise, then Congress must speak before war breaks. I yield back. Her eyes didn't budge. The words floated. The feed cut, and silence roared back. Within hours, clips of her testimony topped 10 million views. Hashtag spiked, hashtag speak before war, hashtag Congress must vote. Students shared annotated notes on social media. Civics teachers tweeted gratitude. Teach democracy like this. One teacher wrote, she didn't just show up for debate, she was the debate. Soon after, lawmakers from both parties reposted the clip with captions like, worth watching and oversight matters. A moderate GOP senator commented in a Washington Post excerpt, her presentation wasn't partisan, it was constitutional. That's why everyone was watching. C-SPAN displayed a wave chart, viewership higher than any hearing in years. Even after the feed ended, social platforms buzzed. Quiet storm. She is civics. 417. Mark that time. And news cycles followed. Tonight, live coverage of the Capitol's next move. Tomorrow, classroom analyses and water cooler debates. Because when Congress goes quiet and the people still demand answers, that's democracy echoing. And if war powers can be wielded in silence, then AOC made sure, on national television, they'd be wielded with full scrutiny. There were no fireworks, no raised fists, no walkouts, just one chair, one woman, one sentence. The final frame of the congressional hearing was supposed to be procedural, AOC thanking the committee, the gavel dropping. Instead, it was something else entirely. As the moderator reached for the mic, she leaned in, not louder, just clearer, and delivered a line that would be replayed across every screen in America. If war can be authorized in silence, then democracy can die in it. The room didn't move, not even a shuffle, and then the feed cut. But the silence didn't last. Within minutes, that clip, just 8 seconds, was clipped, posted, retweeted. By noon, it had 12 million views. By evening, 60 million. AOC's line, spoken without theatrics, now echoed in digital stone. It didn't shout. It haunted. News anchors paused. Commentators stalled. On CNN, one analyst whispered, "That's not a soundbite. That's a warning." Twitter erupted, not with outrage, but with resonance. One user wrote, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard." Another added, "That one line just taught my whole AP government class more than 2 textbooks." The ripple widened. By 3 p.m., high schools in 5 states reported students asking, "What did she mean by democracy dying in silence?" A teacher in Seattle printed the quote, posted it over her whiteboard, and tweeted, "Today's civics lesson, this sentence." Even veteran journalists weighed in. Dan Rather posted, "I've heard thousands of political speeches. That one sentence belongs in the Library of Congress." But it wasn't just admiration, it was momentum. Clips with that line became campaign ads, T-shirts, protest signs. At a candlelight vigil for fallen soldiers in Michigan, one parent read it aloud before laying a wreath. On Fox, a panelist tried to brush it off. Dramatic rhetoric, only to be interrupted by a retired colonel who said, "That's not drama, that's what I fought to protect." AOC, meanwhile, stayed quiet. No interviews, no follow-ups, just one pinned tweet, the video without caption. It was as if she knew the line didn't need interpretation. It was the interpretation. And yet the weight of it kept growing. A group of law students wrote an open letter to Congress titled, "Authorized in Silence is Still Too Loud." A newspaper editorial headlined, "She gave us 8 seconds. Now what will we do with it?" At dinner tables, people weren't debating party lines. They were asking something deeper. When did we stop demanding to be asked? AOC's office later revealed something telling. That line wasn't planned. It wasn't in her notes. It wasn't pre-cleared by staff. It was something she'd written in the margin of a notebook weeks earlier, after reading a memo marked classified. In handwriting that looked almost hesitant, it said, "If war can be authorized in silence." She hadn't known when she'd say it. But that day, when the whole country was watching, when the documents had surfaced, when no one else would claim the moment, she did. And it stuck. It stuck because it didn't accuse. It didn't divide. It simply held a mirror. And in that reflection, millions of Americans recognized something they hadn't felt in years. That their voices mattered. That silence wasn't strength. And that one person, armed only with courage and a sentence, could reset the national conversation. In the days that followed, legislation was reintroduced. The War Powers Act trended on Google for the first time since 2003. Congressional attendance at oversight sessions spiked. Civics class attendance even rose in several districts. AOC remained understated. In a rare podcast appearance, she was asked how she came up with that line. She replied, "I didn't. The silence did." And then she signed off. No fanfare. No posturing. Just truth, again. And across the nation, in coffee shops and classrooms, in libraries and living rooms, one line continued to play. Shared, quoted, underlined. If war can be authorized in silence, then democracy can die in it. And for the first time in a long time, people weren't just listening. They were answering. The video didn't end in Washington. It slipped through algorithms, broke past echo chambers, and landed in places no headline ever reached. One such place, a public high school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was Tuesday, 3rd period, U.S. government class. The teacher, a veteran who used to teach from the textbook, paused the lesson plan and wheeled in a monitor. The room dimmed, phones silenced, and AOC's closing line, "If war can be authorized in silence, then democracy can die in it," filled the screen. Silence followed. Then a girl in the back row raised her hand and said quietly, "She didn't yell, but it felt like thunder." The teacher didn't correct her, just nodded. The class broke into discussion, louder than usual. Not partisan, not defensive, just curious. Wait, Congress has to approve war? Why didn't we learn this before? So, they just skipped that part? It wasn't just conversation, it was combustion. For the first time, theory met truth, and truth looked like a young woman with no gavel, no title of speaker, just a mic and a moment. By lunch, the entire school was talking. Posters appeared on lockers quoting her line. A sophomore wrote "Not in Silence" in Sharpie across her backpack. A group of seniors made a TikTok remix of the hearing, cutting her words with historical footage of other ignored warnings. It wasn't activism, not yet. It was awakening, and it wasn't isolated. Across the country, teachers pulled the clip into their classrooms. In Florida, a civics instructor rewrote the week's curriculum to center on constitutional war powers. In Oregon, a history class debated the ethics of silence in politics. In Texas, a group of juniors asked their principal for permission to hold a lunch discussion circle. Topic: when should we speak? IOC's line had become more than a moment. It was a mirror. Cable news couldn't contain it. Even networks that had once mocked her hesitated. A host on a right-wing channel admitted on air, "Whether you like her or not, that sentence is unforgettable." MSNBC ran a 12-minute segment titled, "How 8 Words Reignited Constitutional Debate." The New York Times editorial read, "AOC didn't just challenge war policy, she challenged apathy." But perhaps the most unexpected ripple landed in an email inbox on Capitol Hill. AOC's team received a message. Subject line: "Thank you from my daughter." It was from a military spouse. Her husband had deployed twice without Congress ever voting. The note read, "She came home from school and told me, 'Mom, if Congress has to give permission for war, did they give permission for Dad to go?' I didn't know what to say, but now I know who to thank for the question." The email ended with a photo of the girl standing beside a handwritten poster. "Ask us first." That image went viral again. By Friday, public interest in the War Powers Act surged. The Library of Congress homepage logged record traffic. Wikipedia's page on Congressional War Authority was accessed over 900,000 times in 3 days. AOC stayed silent. No follow-up press blitz, no self-congratulation. Instead, she posted a black and white photo, a school desk. On it, a crumpled note that read, "It felt like thunder." Caption: "The echo matters more than the volume." And just like that, she reframed the national dialogue again. She didn't need the last word. She'd already passed it on. And in classrooms, living rooms, town halls, and lunch tables, those words weren't being repeated. They were being used. The envelope came with no return address, no official seal, just yellowed corners and a single word in cursive on the back flap: "For you." Inside, wrapped in wax paper, was a printed booklet from 1952, aged but intact. The United States Constitution, printed by a civic education group that no longer existed. Its pages smelled faintly of glue and ink and dust, like an attic that remembered. Tucked between the pages was a handwritten note, scrawled in a teacher's looping penmanship. "I taught this to 38 classes. You made it matter again." No name, just a postscript. Page 10, read it aloud. One more time. She flipped to the page. Article 1, Section 8. "The Congress shall have power to declare war." It wasn't a new line, but it landed differently, like the whisper of someone who'd waited decades to be heard. That afternoon, AOC didn't hold a press conference. No stage, no microphone. She opened her live stream from her desk, still in blazer sleeves rolled to her elbows. The Constitution lay open in front of her. The cover faded, the note now pinned beside her keyboard. "I want to read something," she said. "Not because I think you don't know it, but because someone out there believed it was worth passing on." She read it aloud, slowly, clearly, just the clause. No commentary. Then she looked into the camera and said, "This isn't radical, it's just dusty." The chat exploded. Viewers clipped it. Memes bloomed. One side mocked. The other moved. But neither could ignore it. Hashtag #DustOffDemocracy trended for 8 straight hours. And within 2 days, something unexpected happened. Again. A new trend surfaced. Not from influencers, from elders, retired teachers, veterans, librarians, old Civic League members. They began posting videos holding their own copies of the Constitution, some tattered, some framed, some memorized, and simply reading one line. Just one. A retired sergeant from Iowa whispered, "You don't need a microphone to speak with power." A 90-year-old woman from Georgia, shaking slightly, read her line from a copy she'd been gifted during the Eisenhower years. It took one woman to remind us this isn't just paperwork. Local newspapers began running op-eds titled, "The Return of the Civics Generation." High schoolers clipped the elder videos into compilations on TikTok, calling them the Constitutional Chorus. One student edited AOC's live stream side by side with the teacher's note. The video hit 6.7 million views in 24 hours. But what no one expected was the letter that came next. It was from the granddaughter of the retired teacher who'd mailed the Constitution. She'd found her grandmother crying after watching the live stream replay. The granddaughter wrote, "She spent her life wondering if teaching civics still mattered. Last night, she said it finally did again." Enclosed was a photo. The teacher, in a floral nightgown, holding a small TV remote, rewinding the moment AOC read the clause she'd taught her whole life. Caption, "Full circle." AOC reposted it with just 2 words, "Your turn." And just like that, the narrative shifted again. It wasn't about outrage, or partisan wins, or owning anyone. It became a baton, passed from a generation that had memorized rights to one that might finally use them. The Constitution wasn't trending because of a scandal. It was trending because someone had made it felt. In a political landscape dominated by shouting, spin, and spectacle, a worn booklet and a quiet clause had cut through. No slogans, just substance. And a woman who never asked for the spotlight, only for the country to read what it already promised itself. The wall in her Capitol office had always been bare, not from neglect, but intention. A quiet space, an unclaimed canvas. Until now. AOC stood before it with a strip of tape and a single sheet of paper. No logo, no color. Just black ink on white. They forgot the rule, I reminded them. She smoothed it onto the wall with her palm, then stepped back. Her staff, who had watched her weather the leak, the smears, the hearings, the hashtags, now watched her draw a line in ink. The wall became a quiet monument, not to victory, but to vigilance. Because the rule she spoke of wasn't obscure. It was printed in every high school civics textbook. Congress declares war, not the president, not a memo, not a tweet. And yet for weeks, they'd all watch power bend around that clause, quietly, cleverly, cowardly, until she held it up like a mirror. What came next wasn't fanfare. It was friction. The day after her nationwide hearing clip went viral, 3 senior members from both parties visited her office. Not together, separately, but with the same tone. "This isn't helping anyone." She didn't raise her voice. She simply pointed to the wall. "I didn't make the rule. I just stopped pretending it was optional." One senator said, "You made it personal." She replied, "They made it dangerous." Outside the chamber, protesters gathered, not screaming, but reading. Over loudspeakers into bullhorns through megaphones, people took turns reciting the Constitution. Each one stopped at the same clause. "Congress shall have power to declare war." It echoed like a drumbeat. Meanwhile, conservative pundits doubled down. "She's not a scholar. She's a spark plug for chaos." She cherry-picked the parts she liked. But it didn't stick, because she never spoke in hypotheticals. She pointed to memos, footage, omissions. All real, all signed, all time-stamped. And then the final memo leaked. A security staffer, name redacted, had added a handwritten note on the bottom of a legal advisory. "We anticipate congressional response, but recommend minimal engagement." That phrase, minimal engagement, hit like a backhand. It said everything about how power had come to view its check, like a nuisance. AOC printed that page and posted it next to the first on her wall. Now 2 lines stared back. They forgot the rule. I reminded them. "Recommend minimal engagement." A CNN reporter asked her, "Is this wall protest or performance?" She answered, "It's a receipt." That clip became a rallying cry online. Hashtag wall of receipts flooded social media as Americans began posting their own symbolic rules. Codes of ethics, forgotten amendments, district pledges, taped to kitchen walls, school lockers, nursing home bedsides. No branding, just belief. Then came the classroom walls. Teachers across the country asked students to create a civic wall, one rule they thought America forgot, and what it would mean to remember it. A photo went viral, A fifth-grade classroom with 32 post-its under a giant heading in crayon. We're still reading. One note read, "If they're skipping rules, maybe we should stop skipping civics class." AOC posted it with no caption, just a heart and a folded hands emoji. And that night, the Capitol Police reported something strange. Visitors to her office began leaving sticky notes on the wall outside. Quietly, respectfully, no slogans, just lines from the Constitution. It grew into an unspoken memorial. Not to a moment, but to a warning that the cost of silence is always paid in hindsight. Inside her office, alone, AOC lit a candle. Not for dramatics, for ritual. For those who had written the rules, read the rules, taught the rules, and watched them erode. She glanced again at the first paper on the wall. They forgot the rule. I reminded them. Then she added a third page. It was blank. Below it, a handwritten note. Your turn. Because democracy isn't a solo act. It's a chorus. And sometimes the wall isn't to divide. It's to remind us what still holds. The final frame of the documentary froze on a quiet classroom. No graphics, no applause. Just a group of middle school students sitting in a circle, each holding a copy of the Constitution. One girl, braces glinting under the fluorescent lights, began to read aloud. War Powers Act. Section 5B, whenever United States Armed Forces are introduced, the President shall submit within 48 hours a report to the Speaker of the House. The room was silent. She finished the clause, looked up, and said softly, "Did they?" No one answered right away. Another student added, "If this isn't followed, what's the point of writing it?" The teacher didn't speak. He simply turned off the projector. That was the closing shot. Then a single line appeared across the screen. This story is fictional, but the fear was real, and the law still stands. For 60 minutes, the documentary had taken viewers through a digital labyrinth. Hearings skipped, memos leaked, a war almost authorized in silence. At the center of it all, one woman who refused to shout but never backed down. AOC had narrated most of the voiceover, but never inserted herself visually. It was intentional. "This isn't about a face," she said in interviews. "It's about a clause." Yet despite her modesty, the ripple she caused was no longer metaphorical. It had names, faces, conversations, questions. Across the country, educators reported a spike in student interest in Article I powers. Civics teachers said their inboxes were full. A librarian in Michigan emailed, "We've had to order 10 extra pocket constitutions. They keep disappearing." And in the same week the documentary aired, something else happened. A bipartisan congressional subcommittee quietly introduced a bill to modernize the War Powers Resolution. It included stricter deadlines, automatic funding cutoffs, and mandatory public briefings. The bill didn't carry her name, but everyone knew where the spark began. Some in the media tried to downplay it. Symbolism doesn't equal change. But on the floor of Congress, a freshman representative stood to speak. When people say this movement didn't shout, they're missing the point. It didn't need to. It spoke in article numbers. And the silence that followed? That was fear realizing it had been seen. By then, the wall outside AOC's office had become an attraction. Not for selfies, but for signatures. Veterans, teachers, students, even former skeptics. A janitor signed beneath a quote with the words, "She didn't light a fire, she uncovered one." Meanwhile, AOC declined all celebratory interviews. She chose instead to do a town hall at a community college in El Paso. No cameras, no applause signs, just folding chairs. A student stood and asked, "What made you keep going when they all looked away?" She replied, "Because if we only fight when it's popular, we've already surrendered the meaning of service." The crowd didn't cheer. They just nodded. Legacy, she reminded them, isn't volume. It's consistency. It's what stays when the noise leaves. Back in D.C., a journalist walked past her wall and whispered to his colleague, "Funny how the quietest one became the echo." And that's what the documentary did. It turned a moment of tension into a mirror, a reflection not just of broken protocol, but of neglected responsibility. One final scene played after the credits. A student, same classroom, writing on the chalkboard, "We don't need new heroes. We just need to remember the old rules." Underneath, someone had drawn a small gavel, and beside it, in child scrawl, no sound, just law. And that was the echo, not the kind that fades, but the kind that teaches. Because legacy doesn't always shout. Sometimes it recites. What happens when someone walks into a storm and doesn't raise their voice, but changes everything anyway? That's what we witnessed with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In a room soaked in partisanship and ego, where everyone expected speeches, she did the unthinkable. She refused the drama. She didn't debate. She didn't accuse. She read one line. Only Congress shall declare war. No commentary, no preamble. Just the Constitution, cold, clear, and cutting. And in that stillness, something seismic happened. A pause that hit harder than any protest. A silence that didn't mean surrender. It meant reckoning. This wasn't a soundbite. This was a mirror held up to power, and the people, across party lines, across generations, felt it. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. In an era obsessed with viral outrage, this moment went viral for the opposite reason. It reminded us that real leadership isn't always about being the loudest in the room. It's about knowing when to let truth speak for itself. That simple sentence triggered thousands of students to Google the Constitution. It made educators rewrite their lesson plans. It pushed Congress to reconsider what it had become, a theater for politics instead of a guardrail for the people. AOC didn't just say words, she resurrected meaning. And maybe that's the most radical act in Washington today. Have you ever witnessed a moment where silence spoke louder than a speech? What did it teach you? Watching this unfold, I'm reminded of moments in my own life where I stayed quiet, thinking I needed to shout to be heard. But sometimes stillness is strategy, precision is power, and courage isn't always about volume. It's about values. So here's what I took from AOC's moment. You don't need a microphone to matter. You need a message, and the guts to deliver it, even if it's just 7 words long. She didn't shout. She didn't bend. She read one line, and the room finally listened. Hashtag truth without noise. Hashtag declare. War on silence. Hashtag AOC. Hashtag civic courage. Hashtag viral wisdom. Hashtag must watch. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.